A student who regards a corrupt businessman as his or her role model would invariably emulate him without remorse. Do not do so. Indeed, the anti-colonial organization formed by our people, Aborigines Rights Protection Society, sent a delegation from our then Gold Coast to London to drive home a point with success. Our argument was simple. There are no ownerless lands here. Every inch of our land is tied in with the soul, culture, and religion of our people. Therefore, our land could not be held to be anyone's possessions. If you desired a parcel of land, you negotiated for it. If the colonial government acquired land, it ought to pay compensation to the owners. Thus, the principle was firmly established at Westminster that in our then Gold Coast, native law will remain and prevail with regard to the devolution of land. Upon this fight and push, we saved ourselves the calamity that befell some of our African brethren, whereby the ancestral and heritage lands were ceded off to colonialists and foreigners. We adopted our present constitution into force in 1993, in which we proudly declared the principle of probity and accountability built on a complex system of checks and balances. On the international scene, we ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, ANCAC, on 24 June 2007, and the African Union Convention on Preventing and Combating Corruption around the same time. Under the Constitution, we established the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, SHRAJ, and tried to clothe it with anti-corruption mandates under Article 218E of the Constitution. We then created the Serious Fraud Office, which we rechristened the Economic and Organized Crime Office, EOCO, to tackle economic crimes with a sidewind criminal anti-corruption mandate. 20 years after running this model, it became clear that the SHRAJ anti-corruption model was impractical and it was not working. This is because SHRAJ's real intended purpose, as the National Human Rights Commission and the Ombudsman, rendered it unsuitable to fight corruption in the real sense, and the Article 218E mandate was clearly a stopgap measure for a much more robust and concrete future anti-corruption regime. Further, it saddled SHRAJ with dilapidating inundation, as it lacked any real power in the anti-corruption space, as its mandate does not involve any sanctions. This is because it is required merely to circuitously forward the outcome of its anti-corruption investigations to the Attorney General and the Auditor General. The EOCO setup was also not optimal. This was mainly because EOCO is an agency under the Attorney General's department and is invariably able only to institute criminal proceedings on the say-so of the Attorney General. This rendered it incapable of tackling corruption, especially regarding political actors and politically exposed persons. The need for an independent institution with an effective and all-encompassing anti-corruption mandate became increasingly pronounced, especially during the institution of the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, NACAP, in 2014. The underlying philosophy of the NACAP is the recommendation of the establishment of an independent prosecution authority to effectively tackle corruption. The thinking was that the Attorney General, being a member of cabinet and the chief legal advisor to the government, is not well suited to investigate and prosecute members of a government to which he belonged. There is still immense force in this thinking, Your Excellency. This was the chief consideration that informed the passage of the Office of the Special Prosecutor Act 2017, Act 959, which established the Office of the Special Prosecutor in 2018 as a flagship anti-corruption institution of the Republic with a unique fourfold mandate of investigating corruption and corruption-related cases, prosecuting suspected offenders, recovering and managing assets, and taking steps to prevent corruption. Intended as fulfillment of a campaign promise during the 2016 presidential election process, the OSP is actually the satisfaction of Ghana's treaty obligations under Articles 6 and 36 of ANCAC that requires state parties to establish independent specialized authorities to combat corruption through law enforcement, and Article 5.3 of the African Union Convention. Its outlook is also intended as founded on the Jakarta Statement on Principles for Anti-Corruption Agencies pronounced in November 2012 by parties to ANCAC. Your Excellency, the OSP model represents our best bet in tackling corruption, And upon this architecture, it is a unique and never-before-seen remedy designed as a cure of the inadequacies of the traditional methods we had previously adopted, which are characterized by the lack of real legal and enforcement powers and independence of action, as the model retains total control over the initiation of the conduct of investigations and the institution of criminal proceedings. Then again, the model affords political neutrality and non-selectiveness in the fight against corruption. For the first time in our history, the OSP model forcefully carries the fight against corruption not only in the province of public officers and public life, but also among politically exposed persons and persons in the private sector. The model is not without its shortcomings, as is suffered by every human construct. Yet we have a golden opportunity to, once again, retool and reshape it to fit our purposes during the current exercise of constitutional review. On this score, it must be borne in mind that the fight against corruption is multifaceted. First, the law always appears to be a step behind criminal innovation, and as technological advancement ushers in marvels hitherto unknown, perpetrators of corruption devise sophisticated ways adapted to avoid detection. Second, truth is always the first casualty in any criminal inquiry. Those who engage in grand corruption are wealthy. They possess the means and wherewithal to mount formidable campaigns of misinformation and truth distortion. They also pose a real and present danger to anti-corruption officials through intimidation, open threats, and actual harm, even to the point of killing. After all, I would like to say, wealth equals protection, and power is immunity from scrutiny. Third, corrupt activities are the most difficult to prove, as they are carried out in stealth, and the state of mind accompanying such acts are often well-tied, shrouded, and unregulated by clear criminal constructs. Fourth, corruption prevention is preferable to after-the-fact models of fighting corruption. It is more productive and cost-effective. Better to prevent the outbreak of a stitch than to seek to sow it after it ensues. These pragmatic considerations should guide our plans on this architecture. The focus should be on a system which will stand the test of time, Your Excellency. With this in mind, that while no anti-corruption system is fail-safe, ours should be reasonably able to withstand attack. On this reckoning, we should highlight lifestyle audit non-conviction-based asset recovery. Global anti-corruption best practices indicate that broad-based lifestyle audit, non-conviction-based asset recovery presents the fairest and optimal method of frontally addressing corruption and unexplained wealth in both public and private contexts, though it is not without controversy. However, it is gratifying to note the receptiveness of our jurisprudence of lifestyle audit under Article 2864 of the Constitution. However, it is strictly limited in scope and outlook, as it only applies to certain public officers and only in respect of the asset declaration regime. Then again, there is no prescribed sanction beyond the declaration that property or assets acquired after the initial declaration of assets and which are not reasonably attributable to reasonable sources will be deemed to have been acquired in contravention of the Constitution. Further, this problem is exacerbated by the fact that our criminal anti-corruption provisions in the Criminal Offences Act 1960, Act 29, and other enactments look primarily to public officers. Private persons are only implicated if they corrupt or seek to corrupt public officers. Otherwise, private persons are not within the purview of our traditional anti-corruption fight. It is for the above and other considerations that the advent of the OSP regime took the fight against corruption beyond our traditional arena of public life and situated the fight squarely among public officers, politically exposed persons, and persons in the private sector, as reflected in the long title of the Act and copious sections under the Act in the specific context of asset recovery, that is, the third mandate of the OSP, which is to recover and manage the proceeds of corruption and corruption-related offenses in relation to public officers, politically exposed persons, as well as persons in the private sector. However, this mandate is largely in the context of conviction-based proceedings, though the OSP is mandated to exercise limited aspects of civil asset recovery under its declaration of property and income regime. Therefore, Your Excellency, the principle of lifestyle audit non-conviction-based asset recovery should be stamped in the Constitution to encompass public officers, politically exposed persons, and persons in the private sector suspected of having engaged or engaging in corruption and corruption-related activities, on the reckoning that the person must have legitimate sources of income sufficient to justify the interest in any property that that person holds. Therefore, where a person's resources far outstrip his legitimate income, the unexplained portion should be liable to confiscation. This will be a critical tool also to detect fraud and undeclared income for tax purposes. Thus, conviction after criminal proceedings should not be a condition precedent for asset recovery purposes. That is, proceedings on an application for a confiscation order or a restraint order should be civil and not criminal. Then again, the rules of evidence applicable to civil proceedings should apply to confiscation and restraint proceedings, and confiscation orders should have the effect of a judgment of the High Court appealable to the Court of Appeal. In relation to this, there should also be a reverse onus clause of a presumption of corruption tied to lifestyle audit. That is to say, in all proceedings, civil and criminal, there should be a presumption of corruption. One, where a person, whether in public or private life, is in possession of property or resources for which he cannot satisfactorily account for, or pecuniary resources and property disproportionate to his known legitimate sources of income, should be deemed to have been obtained or received through corrupt means. And two, a gift to a public officer by a person who has or seeks to have any dealings with a government or public agency should be deemed to have been given and received corruptly as an inducement or reward. Further, there should be a more robust and effective asset declaration mechanism in respect of public officers and persons undergoing lifestyle audit to close the loop on the amassing of illicit wealth and to enhance accountability. We should move beyond mere repositories to a system of verification and tracing undeclared assets. However, and I'm coming to disappoint some of you, I do not, and I will not add my voice to calls for the publication of assets for public scrutiny. In our experience, it will be unhelpful and would merely subject public officers to inordinate public curiosity and the specter of the real likelihood of reprisals against their assets. In my estimation, a publication of who has declared or has not declared his assets in the context of a workable asset verification and tracing model would be sufficient to assure the integrity of the asset declaration system. On another score, I dare say, corruption begins where values collapse. That is why integrity must be designed into our educational system, from the basic level through to the tertiary level. And I'm looking at students. A student who regards a corrupt businessman as his or her role model would invariably emulate him without remorse. Do not do so. Thank you. A society in which the youth adore and celebrate ill wealth would only reap get rich, corrupt, and fraudulent practices. I cannot state all that is on my mind on our accountability journey at this stage, Your Excellency, except to say that we must strive to change the narrative and fashion our own course and course by keeping the glimmer on the horizon glowing until the light beckons closer and shines overhead in a just and prosperous trajectory. Let me try and add my own version to the old Negro spiritual I alluded to when I began. Remember I said it goes, sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, sometimes it's down to the ground. I want to re-sing it. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, and even when it's down, we shall keep the lights up. Thank you.
This is still news on WIDERmedia, and I'm Hema Wider. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and follow comment.